So welcome to the bookstrapping conversation at the Global Pioneer Summit. And hi, Michael. Good to have you here.
Hi. Good to see you, Reeta.
Okay, so we have so many pioneers amongst us today, not just in the guest list, but also in the speakers that we've had today. And our topic for the day is reading is our species' bridge to deep work. And since we've all just had lunch, I have to say something to wake all of us up. There is very little difference between a person who can't read and a person who won't read. I want to say that again. There is very little difference between a person who can't read and a person who won't read. We taught ourselves to read roughly 5,000 years ago as a species, and that transformed everything that we could accomplish with our mind and our abilities. Look how far we've come since we taught ourselves to read. Without the ability to read and express ourselves and collaborate, we might have been stuck in a primitive existence. So reading has been a massive part of our ability to communicate with each other. It is generative, it generates both thought and action. And since we have a pioneer here, Michael, with us today, our first question to him is about the pioneers who talk about a book that changed their life.
Yeah.
Advertising legend David Ogilvy famously said that nobody should have anything to do with marketing until they have read scientific advertising at least 7 times. So, Michael, tell us about a book that inspired you and made you believe that the Global Citizen platform was indeed a possibility.
Well, thank you, Reeta, and it's wonderful to be with you virtually. I hope next time I'll be with you in person. Yes. You know, a book that really struck me when I was in university, just finishing high school and figuring out how to make a difference in the world. You know, I had been one of those kids who throughout high school, I was bottom of the class, was bad at sports, which is blasphemy for an Australian to say, couldn't kick a football in the right direction to save my life. But for a fantastic teacher, really wouldn't have been able to get into university. But because I had this great teacher, I was able to study law, get into university, and really be grateful for the opportunities I had. And I wanted to give back, and I wanted to make an impact and extend opportunity to children around the world who didn't have maybe the same opportunities I had grown up in Australia. And a book which one of my teachers recommended to me at the time, he was my English literature teacher in my last year of high school. He recommended a book called The Road Less Traveled by M. Scott Peck. And The Road Less Traveled, the name of the book is taken from a poem by the American poet David Frost, who famously said that 2 roads diverged in the wood, and I took the one less traveled by. And for that, it has made all the difference. And M. Scott Peck's book, The Road Less Traveled, it really paints up a way on how to be brave, how to be courageous, and how to take that road less traveled. And it was something that gave me a lot of comfort in my life. Studying law school, everyone was like, do I need to go out and work for the big law firms? Do I need to get a graduate position working as a big lawyer? I've just studied law school. And instead, this taught me to go out and start my own organization, Global Citizen, and have confidence in that. And really, I think at the end of the day, you know, believe that, listen, what's the worst that can happen? If it's failure, there's still going to be law firms there for you in a few years' time. So don't stress the small stuff. So I would definitely recommend M. Scott Peck's book, The Road Less Traveled, for those looking to take the road less traveled by.
Right. Thank you so much, Michael. And we've spoken about this book before, so it brings back many memories. The topic here today is really deep work. And earlier in the day, I heard a conversation between Dilshad and Kunal Shah. And they were talking about a generation who has seen it all and is perpetually bored. And I think the task here for most people is to try and get the attention of this generation, which itself requires deep work. One way to prepare yourself for deep work is travel, is spirituality. And another way is to read the authors you disagree with, because it challenges you and forces you to consider options and go deeper into every subject. So while you were working on Global Citizen, which were the authors you completely disagree with that you read and which sparked your imagination?
I think it's important to read books about even leaders you admire and to figure out, well, what were their faults? What were the things that they could have done better? Because the reality is I think society gets itself into trouble when we put everyone on a pedestal and we idolize people and we don't see them for very human figures, because even the most greatest leaders of all were people and flawed human beings in and of themselves. And so there's many books out there that I try and read that take, critical views and open-ended views about people we might admire in the world. One particular book was that I read a few years ago was called Churchill's Shadow, which, growing up with my parents are from the UK, Winston Churchill has a certain type of reverence in the UK. I know less so perhaps in India. And so I think it's important to say, okay, yes, this was a man who is idolized because he took on fascism, but it was in spite of his faults. It was in spite of his faults that we idolized the man. And the reason why I think it's important to take a critical analysis to ideas we might like, organizations we might admire, leaders we might put on a pedestal is because John Stuart Mill, the philosopher, once said, our ideas only get stronger if we're comfortable with them being debated and wrestled with. And I think when it comes to history, behind me on the wall, I have this West African proverb that goes, you have to go back to the past in order to build the future. Yes. And so I think reading books about history that really take a critical view and show both sides of the story is really important. So I'd encourage everyone, if you have an idea, organization, or leader you really like, try and read something that challenges you to see it from both sides.
Right. Thank you so much for that. And while we are on the topic of deep work and, getting across to a generation that has lesser and lesser attention spans, and therefore the importance of reading and developing a cognitive basis for the campaigns and the communication that one is going to roll out. In his book, Morgan Housel, Same as Ever, he said that rely on what will never change. Don't make decisions based on trends all the time. Instead, focus on what will never change. So, for example, the consumer's need for convenience. That is never going to change. Yeah. And another layer to this is what Nobel laureate Eric Kandel said, that, you have to stay with information for a while. It's like opening a tap and the vessel is full. And at some point, you have to close the tap for the vessel to retain the water. Otherwise, it keeps overflowing. So when you read, you collect the dots. And when you think about what you read, you connect the dots. And that is how you gain perspective. So my question to you is, how do the marketers of today, and how did you, while you built Global Citizen, ensure that you built a very strong cognitive foundation to the programs that you were going to roll out?
I remember when we were building Global Citizen, and yes, I traveled a lot, including to India. I've been to India many times, and of course, we're known there for the Global Citizen Festival in 2016. But my first trip was in 2008, July 2008, while I was still a university student. I think I was 18 years old or 19 years old at the time. But I remember at the time when I was traveling, I was reading all of these books about these ideas on how do you end extreme poverty? How do you develop societies? I was reading books by the economist Jeffrey Sachs on the end of poverty. I was reading Muhammad Yunus's Banker to the Poor. And people may not have agreed with all the methods and analysis in those books, but I just remember there was something powerful at the time, at a young age, not just engaging in conversations, but then reading, whether it was in the bus, on the plane, that really forces you to digest what you're learning in the real world, and having that theory and practical application is so important, because if you're an advocate like I am, you have to engage in debate. You have to put yourself in the shoes of other people, and you have to be able to argue in a persuasive way. And at the end of the day, the only way you ultimately have credibility is with that depth that you can get from reading. And just as one example where, you're talking about the trends versus generalizations without having a deep understanding with what's going on. Just one example, Global Citizen, we're a movement of 12.5 million global citizens, including in India. And I would say, I think between 60 to 70% of our audience are Generation Z, right? Young people aged 18 to 24. And I often hear people make these sweeping generalizations that Generation Z is the most sustainable, sustainable, friendly consumer base the world has ever seen, right? But actually, when you get down to it, and I've heard even Generation Z social media influencers tell me this, when you get down to it and you look at their actual behavior, well, even a cohort which is claimed to be purpose-driven, they still behave like everyone else when it comes to price, as in there's still a limit to how much more they're willing to pay for sustainable goods. And so a recurring theme from my work is actually don't make generalizations. In my book, and I have a bonus chapter coming out called The Innovator, after interviewing many people who have disrupted supply chains, disrupted businesses, been great marketeers. But one common theme from them all is that they say successful innovation is actually about the discipline of piloting and testing before scaling. Now that doesn't sound glamorous, but it's often the only way to separate, substance from noise and to make decisions rooted in reality and not wishful thinking. And I've got many examples in my book, From Ideas to Impact, and I have a Substack which people can subscribe to my newsletter. I publish other examples and stories, but really piloting and testing is so important rather than making these sweeping generalizations, and digesting and actually reading the results of that, understanding your audience.
We read and reviewed your book at Storyboard 18, and I remember a lot of good points it made. Chiefly that when you negotiate, not everyone's going to walk away with a 100% result. So someone's going to reach 60%, another person's going to reach 40%, and you have to get up and move on. You wear two hats at Global Citizen, right? You are the CEO, you head all the marketing initiatives. And every marketer today needs to think like a CEO, and every CEO needs to think like a marketer. So before you decide, what you're going to roll out, would you rather read a book by a CEO or a book by a practicing marketer?
So I thought about this a lot. I would say without question, a book by a marketer. Now, I don't think that's the same for everyone. I think it depends on what you're trying to do. In our mission at Global Citizen, we're trying to build the largest action-taking platform and social movement to end extreme poverty. And therefore, really, in our mission is about changing hearts and minds. It's about reaching people, engaging people, and understanding that whilst I might care about international development, while I might obsess about this, not everyone is every day of the week, but that doesn't mean they don't have an interest. It just means that no one is one-dimensional. We each have all of these interests. We each have all of these aspects going on in our life. And so with Global Citizen, I see it as our mission is to hook people, get their interest, so that we can get them on this funnel of engagement, so that we can get more depth. It might start with someone first coming across a piece of content. Maybe they want to come and see Coldplay perform. And so they take action on our platform. And for anyone who knows Global Citizen, our model is you download our app, you take action, you can learn about issues, you can take quizzes, and then you can earn points. But here's the thing, is you take more in-depth action, right? Maybe you volunteer in person, you can earn even more points to go in the draw to earn tickets and other awards to our events. And so for us, storytelling is key. Storytelling is how you hook people. And I challenge all of our team. I say it's not just the marketing team's responsibility. Everyone here, we have close to 100 full-time staff. Everyone in our organization is communicators in some ways. They're ambassadors for our mission. And if you can't readily explain our mission to your parents, or your brother or your sister or your neighbor next door, if you can't leave a conversation in which they're inspired, that you've convinced the person sitting next to you on the plane or in the bus to download the Global Citizen app, then you need to read up on our mission and you need to figure out how to tell stories, because ultimately that's what good advocates are. And one of my favorite proverbs is, no one can do everything, but everyone can do something. And something we can all do is be good storytellers if we take the time to really digest and understand the issues and understand how to tell good stories.
And while we are on storytelling, and I think we are almost close to our last question here, on an average today, a newspaper gives us more information than a 17th century individual was exposed to in their entire lifetime. So there is so much to absorb. And at the same time, a certain amount of clarity is needed when you're about to tell that story. And gaining this clarity comes from, collecting a lot of information. And there are so many modes, podcasts and YouTube channels, and so many that are available to us today. And yet, neuroscience screams at us that reading is still the primary mode of absorption, of deeper absorption, of cognitive clarity. So, any parting thoughts for us on this, Michael?
Yeah, I loved that statistic you mentioned about what's contained in a newspaper compared to what someone a few hundred years ago would have absorbed in their lifetime. It's similar to the fact that up until fairly recently in the grand scheme of human history, most people didn't travel beyond the neighboring town, a couple of miles away. So we are digesting more than ever before. And I think our way to deal with that is often to simplify, look for summaries. And in that, technology can be important, and you can use, our phones, you can use artificial intelligence, I think, to read more productively if you're using it in the right way. When I read concepts these days, the thing I love about AI now is, there used to be words or phrases, or things which I wouldn't necessarily understand, I would grapple with, and now I can challenge myself. But don't use AI and technology just to summarize. There is no shortcut to learning, because as you said, the data is clear. Not only does it have cognitive impacts, not only does it have impacts on our ability to think critically, which is necessary for a great, healthy social fabric and a thriving democracy, but I think it also leads to things like anxiety, apathy, distress, depression. But also, I think it rips out the joy. And we must remember that there is a certain amount of joy when you're reading and when you get into that world of escapism, right? When you pick up a book, you are transporting yourself out of this world into another world. And there's a magic, and I have to imagine a certain level of dopamine or certain level of happiness that comes from that can't easily be replicated. And I remember the joy, and we've spoken about this before. I remember when the Harry Potter books used to come out. I still remember reading the first Harry Potter. It took me until the third chapter and being transported into the world. I was around the same time, first year of high school, very shy, got bullied at school. This gave me a way of escapism. And I remember when the books would come out, lining up outside the store. And when the last book came out, I lined up and I was devouring this book for 24 hours, couldn't put it down. And I remember speaking to someone and they said to me, I just went on Wikipedia and just read the plot review and figured out the ending. And I was like, you've missed a journey, because, it's cliche, but the whole thing, it's not about the destination, it's about a journey. Well, you can't replicate that by just going on Wikipedia. So I think there is a certain level of happiness and joy that also comes from reading and mental health, as well as really helping us be critical analysts. And I couldn't think of anything more important. And so it's true, use technology to enhance our reading and challenge ourselves, but not as a substitute for reading.
Wow. Thank you so much for your time today, Michael. And a note of thanks to the Global Pioneer Summit to hosting a program on the importance of reading. It means a lot. And let's ensure that at a time when we were in denial for a very, very long time about climate change perhaps, and we should not be in denial about the loss of skills due to lack of reading that we are all facing today. So happy reading, and let's preserve the cognitive skills that reading gave us. Thank you so much.